Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, I'm going to share with you my thoughts of healing each tank in Shadowlands. Now that some hard content is coming soon, your abilities as a healer or any other spec are going to be put to the test. One of the best ways to not only improve your healing, but eventually find a more long-term pushing group, is to develop some strong healer-tank coordination. I hope this information is also helpful for DPS players as well as tanks, just interested in the healer perspective. However, this video will be mainly focused on the healer point of view. I'm just going to give a quick rundown on each tank so you have a base understanding of how they work right now. As I get more experience working with the different tanks, I'll likely make some more in-depth videos in the future. Before I start, I just want to talk briefly about the state of tanks right now. If you've been healing towards the end of the expansion or just during other expansions, you might feel like tanks seem a bit weak. That's completely normal, and it's just part of the character progression and expansions. Everyone's a bit weak, including healers with healer power too, and then over the course of gearing up, get much stronger. This means that sometimes tanks are just going to need a bunch of healing. Even if they are doing everything and playing well, there might be moments of high tank damage that you're just going to have to power through. Get in the habit of paying more attention to the tank and overall having a more defensive focused mindset, at least for the first season. Let's go into specific tanks now. I'm going to start with some of the more difficult or less obvious tanks to heal, and then work towards the tanks that I enjoy healing the most. This definitely comes down to opinion, and one thing I always say is that player skill matters much more than what class you're playing when it comes to tanks. Not only are tanks somewhat well balanced right now, but as a tank you have control of the dungeon. You can pull around your cooldowns, kite when you want to kite, and so on. A well-played tank of any spec can almost always make it work even in the highest keys. Blood decays are notoriously a bit frustrating and mysterious to heal. Their health jumps around constantly, with lower than average mitigation but extremely high self-healing. Blood decay heals through the ability Death Strike, giving them HP back based off of the amount of damage they're taking. As a healer, your main concern with blood decay should be keeping light hots on them alongside small amounts of healing during low to medium damage. This is because their main weakness will be getting killed before they can death strike the health back. Keeping some hots on them means they won't have to death strike low amounts of damage and will stay top to give them more time to react. They should be constantly using this death strike ability throughout the entire dungeon, and as a healer you need to know when they can gain health back and when they might be in trouble. To do this, you want to track their runic power, either with your party frames or simply a weak aura. Generally speaking, if a DK has 40 runic power or more, they can use Death Strike. There are some situations where this isn't the case, but this should be your assumption for the most part. When a DK has runic power, you don't need to be bombing healing into them. They will be doing most of their own self-sustain. You're mainly there to keep some hots up and for direct healing when they start running low. If you see a DK running low on runic power, it's a good time to use a damage reduction external on them or maybe slow and displace mobs to help them kite. The key to healing blood decay is realizing that, well, you can't really save them. Their life is more or less in their own hands, and the best you can do is help them do what they need to do to survive. Second, I'm going to talk about Prot Warriors. Although they have been knocked down a bit from their reigning #1 spot in BFA, they're still decent tanks and somewhat straightforward to heal. Most of their damage mitigation comes from shield block, simply blocking melee attacks. This means they are excellent at dealing with physical hits, but quite poor at managing other things. Against heavy magic damage and bleeds, they will need a lot of healing since their self-sustain is limited compared to other classes. Knowledge of the dungeon is a big help in knowing what packs a warrior is safe against and when they will need that big healing. Warriors have a mixed bag of different cooldowns that are helpful to track if you want to further understand their incoming damage. Demoralizing Shout is applied to mobs that reduces their damage, so it isn't a defensive they have on themselves. It's a good idea to track it on mob nameplates or simply just watch the cooldown of it to know when it's active. Shield Wall is their big DR cooldown, and is generally used for big gaps in mitigation. Also remember that if talented, Last Stand gives warriors shield block during its entire duration. Last Stand can be used when they run out of block charges in order to regain all of them back without taking heavy damage. There isn't a whole lot to say specifically about healing warrior, just watch out for those magic damage and bleed effects, as well as heavy physical hits during shield block downtime. Let's move on to Prot Paladins. Prot Palis are quite interesting to heal and the only tank I honestly haven't spent a long period of time healing in high keys. They mitigate damage through Shield of the Righteous, an armor buff that should be kept up most of the time. The important thing to know about prot pallies is that Shield of the Righteous often isn't enough for hard-hitting packs. This means they're going to need big cooldowns alongside of it, either Wings, Ardent Defender, or Guardian of Kings. If you see a prot pally doesn't have one of these major cooldowns, you can expect that you'll need to pump them with big healing. This is often a good time to use your own damage reduction external like Ironbark or Blessing of Sacrifice as well. Another important thing to note about prot pallies is their passive, Shining Light. This gives them a free heal to use every 5 casts of Shield of the Righteous. Although a majority of their holy powers should go into maintaining their armor buff, they can occasionally heal themselves for large bursts. It's probably a good idea to track this buff to know when they're sitting on that free heal. As a healer, that gives you more room to focus on teammates or just DPS when you know your tank has that heal saved up. One other small note about prot pallies is that if you're a holy paladin, you almost never want to use any forbearance ability on them. Your lay on hands will lock them out of theirs as well as bubble, so be sure not to use it on the tank unless they have nothing left. It's extremely disorienting as a tank to plan on using your own defensive only to get forbearance put on you by your healer. To wrap up, healing pallies is going to require a bit more juice than average when you get to harder content, especially when they don't have any major cooldowns available. Vengeance Demon Hunters are very straightforward tanks that have gotten a lot stronger in Shadowlands. They have a reasonable mix of self-healing, mitigation, mob control, and utility. The two things to watch out for from a Demon Hunter is Demon Spikes and Meta. Demon Spikes is their medium level mitigation, giving them a sizable armor buff whenever it's active. Demon Spikes can't be maintained all the time, however, and they fill in the gaps during hard pulls with Metamorphosis. Meta can be activated in 3 different ways. It's simply an on-use from a long cooldown, they get a short duration of it when they use Fell Devastation, and it also activates if they proc their Cheat Death. Generally speaking, during your meta, your tank shouldn't require as much healing. Demon Hunters have a large health pool, high armor, and some decent self-healing. When healing Demon Hunters, you have to understand though that they aren't going to be able to keep meta or demon spikes up for the entire fight. Although their mitigation uptime has improved from last expansion, it still isn't close to 100% and they will take heavy damage in between. A skilled Demon Hunter can use their mobility to kite during the downtime to reduce their damage taken, but really you should be ready to heal them if they're running out of demon spikes with no meta available. Brewmasters are also pretty straightforward and one of my preferred tanks to heal. Even though they require a decent amount of healing, their damage intake is very smooth and predictable compared to most other tanks. Brewmasters mitigate damage through stagger. Anytime they take big hits, instead of taking them head on, much of the damage is delayed into a damage over time effect spread out over the next 8 seconds. You can actually track the size of this dot at all times, indicated by a green, yellow, or red buff on the monk. You can also use a weak aura if you want to see this exact number. This means you know exactly how much damage they're going to be taking and you can plan accordingly. Brewmasters can purify half of their remaining stagger, but they have limited charges so they must use it wisely. A Brewmaster is going to be using their defensives and purifying to stay in the pull as long as possible. Although they will need consistent healing throughout, as it goes on and they start running out of charges to purify, they will end up needing even more healing. Similar to Demon Hunters, a skilled Brewmaster can stay in for as long as they can, then use their mobility to escape when they're running dry. As you get more comfortable healing brews in dungeons, you'll know exactly how much healing they need for each level of stagger and you can plan accordingly. Lastly, we have Bear. Although bears haven't been a popular dungeon tank in quite a long time, they're incredibly durable and have a ton of good utility going into Shadowlands. Bears mitigate damage through Iron Fur, a short duration armor buff that they spend their main resources on. Bears are the best scaling tank with large pull size because Iron Fur stacks. If a bear can generate large amounts of rage, they can stack Iron Fur up to huge numbers and become nearly immune to physical damage. On top of that, bears have multiple on-demand sources of self-healing, mainly through frenzied regen. Scaling with pull size can be a blessing and a curse. Although they are good at dealing with huge packs of mobs, fighting against one particularly hard-hitting mob can be tough to maintain any more than 1 or 2 stacks of fur. In these situations, they will require some more heavy direct healing. It's important to note that although bears can self-heal through frenzied regen, in many situations it's often not a great choice for them to use. Similar to paladins, bears have to give up resource generation and spend global cooldowns on their healing. More often than not, they would prefer to just continue keeping up the mitigation instead of healing themselves. Frenzied regeneration does, however, increase all healing received, so if you see your tank using frenzied regen when they're in danger, you can drop a big heal to top them up quickly. One very nice thing about bears is that they are only limited by the rage they can generate. A bear can always keep mitigation up during a pull and will never run dry like other tanks will. This makes bears excellent for chain pulling or just long, drawn-out, messy fights. Keep in mind that often if a bear goes into a pull without rage, they won't be able to use mitigation and will be hit hard initially until they can get fur up. This can be offset by the Barkskin Legendary, however, not every tank you run into will be using this. All of this information is simply meant to help you help tanks. It's not meant to backseat or tell other people what to do. If I'm telling you that a tank shouldn't need much healing, but it seems like they're dropping low, give the healing to them. This is only meant to help you. That wraps up my summary and thoughts on healing all tanks in Shadowlands, mostly from a dungeon healing perspective. Thanks for watching. I hope this video was helpful for you. If I missed anything, feel free to drop some helpful tips in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like and subscribe to my channel. I'll be uploading more WoW strategy content, mostly focused on high-level Mythic Plus healing. Happy keying!